we began this project from a sense of satisfaction and dissatisfaction. The satisfaction was that for an Introduction to American Government textbook, which is a course that's taught at every community college, state college, and university in the country, there was a better way to incorporate some of the information that was available. And the websites for American government and politics are now phenomenal. They're extremely high quality. You don't know whether or not they're going to be sites that are up or down from one day to the next. So that's that motivated this project. The dissatisfaction was with the traditional textbook, the traditional lecture, and the sense that for a course that's taught everywhere, it wasn't very productive to expect new faculty members, for example, to continue to reinvent the circle. Why would we have to search for textbooks, and why would we have to redesign a course that's taught the same material everywhere? So the digital textbook is one way to get one common book that covers that material. Well, our textbooks in political science have been getting longer and longer and longer, heavier and heavier and heavier, and their shelf lives have been getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And this is an example of what we used to use. Very familiar, very heavy, hardcover, very expensive also. And even the more recent versions, which are soft cover, present some problems. I mean, this is a 1,400 page, maybe not 1,400 pages, but with the appendices, it's over 1,000 pages. And now we know that we're not using all of these pages in an Introduction to American Government course. So there was a lot of material that wasn't being used. So this is the dissatisfaction that prompted an effort to think about developing a digital textbook. The motives are primarily educational, pedagogy. These books are also less and less accessible to students. I don't care how many colored charts you have in here or graphs. The students aren't going to be paying attention to them unless you call attention to them. So I don't think that the addition of color is solving the problem that students find this kind of material less and less accessible. Now, this project isn't intended to move us away from books. It's a project that is based on the assumption that the textbook is probably an outdated way of providing students with introductory material. And the second motive, which is not educational but economic, has also become more important, but that's not the primary reason why we began this digital textbook project. It's certainly the case that economics has become more important. In 2008, Congress passed the law on textbook affordability, and in 2008, the Florida legislature passed a law to address textbook costs, and universities are having to pay attention to the costs of textbooks. So I think that the educational reasons are more important, but economics is becoming one of the reasons as well. And the Department of Political Science adopted an early version of this book. It's been made available free to the students, so we've saved students a deal of money. One of these books costs over $100, and we've had more than 300 to 400 students a semester who take this course, so the savings are really substantial. Now, as far as the process of developing this textbook is concerned, the first stage began with a heavy reliance on Wikipedia as sources. So I would go to Constitutions of the World, for example, screen this, make sure that the information, or I would go to sites on the political parties of the world. Just to give you an example of the kinds of information that students had access to compared to what I had. I'm a public law specialist, and I remember that it was a big deal for me to find the Constitution of another country. Well, now students have all of that material readily available. And so the early process focused on an attempt to see whether or not we could use Wikipedia to build an Introduction to American Government course. And then I learned that Wikipedia wouldn't do that. They don't do courses. So I thought that a next logical place to go would be our professional association, the American Political Science Association. But they also don't do courses. As a discipline, political science is behind history and econ in developing this resource. So despite the fact that Introduction to American Government is taught everywhere, the profession hasn't seen any reason to think about a way to develop at least the basics of such a course. And I thought that was a telling insight into some of the values of the path we're going. The stage of the development of this digital textbook focused on elaborating on and incorporating the use of websites in the course. The websites on government and the websites on politics. And that relied heavily also on the use of Blackboard. So it was an attempt to bring some of these materials into the course using the electronic platform. Going textless was a real problem. And Jenny Peluso told me that the students would not like going textbookless because it was taking away their security blanket. And she was right about that. And I was doing this as a tenured professor because going textbookless is risky business. The initial student reactions to this were not very supportive because it does require that students do more work, interact with more than simply opening up a text. So participating in all of the debates about how important it is to engage students and to promote active learning, the students aren't always very willing to do that. And so, I took a serious hit in those spot scores the first semester when I took their textbook away from them. I saved them money, but I introduced uncertainty. And they actually had some serious concerns. When you go a textbook into a textbook, you lose the sense of where do you find it, how many pages are there? Are they all downloading it the same way? So there are those kinds of legitimate concerns that students have about interacting with digital information. So the next thing that we did in order to develop this into a full-fledged textbook that they could, in fact, download if they wanted to or access electronically was to find some way to develop it into a regular textbook that they could download if they wanted. And at this time, it was about 2 years ago, I was involved with a faculty governance organization that regularly met in Tallahassee with members of the Board of Governors. And some of the staff members for the Board of Governors were involved with the implementation of the Textbook Affordability Act. So they had an interest in trying to encourage the development of digital textbook university, the Orange Grove Open Access Project. And we created a task force, an open access task force, that attempted to find out what kinds of hurdles were there, what kinds of problems were there that were limiting the university's movement toward digital textbook. What kinds of barriers were faculty members facing? What kinds of barriers were the students facing? And the faculty barrier, the most important faculty barrier, was the sense that we had to bring digital textbooks into the academic culture, and that meant peer review. And so we worked with the University of Florida Press. They have a digital initiative coordinator, and they had a process whereby we could submit this manuscript to them and they would send it out for review the way any other textbook would be submitted for review. So that was addressing that very serious problem of bringing digital works into our academia. And the second hurdle, the fact that there was concern that particular universities, not as much at the state colleges, there was a digital publications weren't real public promotion and review process, these kinds of efforts would be discounted. And so the University of Florida digital initiative is intended to bring these kinds of works into the personnel evaluation and academic culture. And we did submit this work to the University of Florida Press, and it was sent out for review, and we got positive results, and so we're now involved with the process of addressing some of the reviewers' concerns about the work that we submitted. We have been making this work available to students free, as I mentioned earlier. It's not going to be free anymore, because E, electronic, does not mean F, free. And so there is going to be a $35 or $40 charge for this if the students want to download it. But that's one of the prices to be paid for bringing this kind of to Metro. And so using it, faculty members who now have had feedback from students on it, so we have a pretty good idea of how it's working. And at this point, maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about its use?
Sure. So I'm Dr. Mirya Holman. I am an untenured member of the Political Science Department. And I was the guinea pig for using this textbook. My interest of developing e-text is a little bit different than Tim. It was that, do you want me to put his mic on? I can't talk to this. So my primary interest in this was that I essentially saw my students paying enormous amounts of money for bricks that they carried around in their backpacks. Things that were not incredibly useful to them, that the publishers would reissue every 2 years, so it was almost always impossible for students to buy affordable used copies. The store would not stock old versions of the books. Something that they occasionally consulted, but really did not use as a primary tool. And I wanted my students to have access to that information, which is generally free information out there in the world, in a concise fashion without paying incredibly high prices for it. So my primary concern was that my students were struggling with the price, and that was my interest in it. Tim had this basic framework on e-text that he had written. I worked on that with a graduate student that had some knowledge of graphic design to create something that looked like it, because students want something that looks like a textbook. That gives them confidence in the information that they're accessing. They like something that looks like a textbook. So that's what we developed. We developed something that looks like a textbook, but that is just the base information with all kinds of connections to all of the active, changing information that's out there in society, primarily through the internet. So here we have a textbook chapter on Congress. There's a lot of information about Congress that does not change very much. Congress is Congress. It's going to continue to be made up of the House and the Senate. That's not going to change. The history of Congress is not going to change. We're not going to suddenly discover that the Declaration of Independence set up a third branch of Congress and all of a sudden everything's thrown out of whack. No, the history of Congress is the history of Congress. So we can have a textbook chapter on the history of Congress that rarely needs to be updated. But at the same time, Congress is an evolutionary organism of government. So we can have a base chapter of information that has all the stuff that doesn't change about Congress, and then links to all of the stuff that does change about Congress. All of the important issues, who is serving in Congress, what the demographics of Congress are, who is in charge, what party is in charge. So that was our idea with this, is to present students with something where they were comfortable with the textbook element of it, but at the same time, they could access all of this dynamic information that's available out there that we don't need to rewrite and republish in a set of bricks every year and charge them $120 for it. So that was the primary idea behind this, and we've been fairly successful in this. So I implemented it for the first time as the guinea pig in the spring of last year. I used it over the summer. All of our American government classes used it in the fall, and they are using it again in the spring. So we have now, including this semester, over 1,000 students that have used this textbook, and that means that we're saving $100,000 for students in a year of action. So we're talking about a lot of money that we're saving for students from this, and they are being successful in using this. We're not seeing dramatic changes in passage rates. We're not seeing dramatic changes in DFW rates. We're not seeing high dissatisfaction with the courses and the course material. We're seeing even levels of spot scores. So in essence, we are being able to implement this textbook without the students suffering and the students getting the advantage of both not paying for it and access to this dynamic knowledge. So we're pretty happy with that. But it does require work to host this. Right now, we essentially have it in Blackboard. We create a place in Blackboard called Government Textbook. They open it up. They can download each chapter as a PDF, or they can read it online. That's how it works right now. We, along with this, have for our students, for our faculty members, a test bank that's been developed that is already in Blackboard and graded in Blackboard, so they can implement quizzes if they want, or they can use it to do tests in their classes. And with this, we start to introduce some of the more complicated issues with implementing an e-text. How do we get other faculty on our campus or other campuses to implement this in a way that works for them, while making sure that we are giving them the services that they want, and making sure that the textbook works for them, and making sure that the exams work for them without becoming an IT support department? How do we do that? And so that's one of the primary reasons we have gone to Orange Grove Press, is because they will do all of the hosting stuff for us. They will do the packaging. They will make sure that it works in Blackboard. All of those things mean that for us, we're able to develop a text that satisfies the criteria that we want without then having to become administrators of that text. And as somebody that is on the tenure track, I can tell you I don't have time to administer a text. That's not something that I have time to do. I don't have time to answer my students' emails when they can't figure out how to open a PDF. I don't want to be the person that has that responsibility. So that's one of the reasons why we have passed this on to Orange Grove. In addition to the text and the test bank, we also got a grant from OpenTextbooks.org and some money from the Provost's office to develop other ancillary materials such as PowerPoint, graphics, essay questions, linked information within the text to particular test questions, things like that. That's what we're working on right now. And we're working on making sure that it complies with all of the things that the reviewers through the peer review process at Orange Grove wanted us to do. So some rearranging, putting a chapter about culture in. That was the big thing. So we continue to work on it. It is not a static product. It's a product that we work on all the time and update all the time. And that's good, and that's also time consuming, and I'm looking forward to the point where we can sort of push it off on somebody else and it stops being something that I spend a lot of time on all the time. So some general lessons that I learned during this process if you were thinking about doing an open text. The first is that there will always be well-intentioned other people that want to work on the e-text but don't actually ever do anything. Don't expect for them to do anything. Free riders exist in the world, that's fine. Move on and expect to do a lot of things yourself. Everybody likes the idea of an e-textbook, but only so many people are actually willing to invest resources in it. So be careful about waiting for somebody else to do it or waiting for somebody else to finish something before you move on. If you don't do it, it's not going to get done. That's a general lesson about everything in life, though, isn't it? The second is that we all have a vast amount of information in our heads, in our lecture notes, in our PowerPoint slides, on the internet, all of the resources that we routinely use to teach classes. All of us are essentially a textbook waiting to happen. We all have the information necessary to build a textbook, or we are very good at getting that information. We're able to do this. So if you think that you want to write a textbook. Go for it. You can do it. Even better, find somebody else that actually wants to do it also and is a fairly active individual and get them to do it with you. Because then you write even a better textbook. But the reality is that we all know enough to write a textbook, especially if we're talking about an introductory class of a bunch of freshmen who are surprised by the fact that we have 2 houses of Congress. We all know enough to write a textbook. So if you're thinking about doing it, please, I encourage you to go ahead and do it, because whatever you write is going to be better than whatever they're paying $100 or $200 or $300 for, because it is going to be what you want them to know about the topic. It is going to be from the perspective of how you teach the class. So you will actually have a textbook that is streamlined with the material that you're covering in class. So when I talk about confidence in Congress, I can show this graph in class, and then later on when they come and read their textbook when they're studying for the exam, they say, oh, you know what? Dr. Holman did say something about low confidence in Congress. What did she say about that? Let me check my notes. So instead of teaching to the textbook teaches to reinforce what you're already covering in the classroom, which is great. That's what you want, right? You want students to have reinforcement about the important information in their lives. So the final lesson that I would say about writing an e-text is it's both easier and harder. It's easier in some ways. We all have a lot of information. It's actually pretty easy to fill up pages on pages of a textbook. It's harder in other ways. It's harder to deal with all of the administrative elements of it. It's harder to deal with students and their questions, things like that. But it's really worth the effort, and I would really encourage you to do it. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So in terms of ownership, right now the political science department at FAU owns the textbook.
That's not going to be true for very long.
Yeah.
When we accepted $8,000 from the provost to help with getting this in final shape, that kicked in Article 18 of the collective bargaining agreement under which we work. And there is a category in it called institutional works. This is now going to be an institutional work because we accepted that $8,000. And therefore, we're going to have an arrangement with the University of Florida for the distribution of the revenue. The university can claim a percentage of the intellectual property rights in this. We don't know what that's going to be because the final contract hasn't been determined. But when we were told that the provost's office was going to make this available, we knew that that wasn't going to be free money, that there was some to it. But that's basically, I think, the most intellectual property issue. We could have delivered our students free the way we're doing it now. It would have been a work that was owned by us. But there are trade-offs. And one of the trade-offs was it's going to cost the students $35 or $40 because of what this press is providing. And when we accepted those $8,000, the university is going to want some of that.
But what we get for that also is that then students at other universities and faculty at other universities can textbook very easily at the lower cost for their students. And FAU, and to some extent the political science department, if there are revenues, gets those revenues from that.
What about you?
I get nothing.
Fair use? Yeah, fair use or no? I don't think we have anything in here that is subject to copyright. Okay. For example, the USA.gov website, which is really the foundation for all of the institutional analysis here, it's a tremendous website, but that's not subject to copyright material.
I was thinking, in case you link to other websites.
That's an issue too.
So we don't have the accreditation issues that business or nursing or to some extent education have, in that the textbooks are not reviewed as part of accreditations to ensure that students are getting some kind of knowledge. That review process, which kicks in some of the information. To some extent.
Yeah. I mean,
to the static information in a book.
Right. But you're saying to make it look like it so that
yeah.
the students are comfortable. I would suggest that maybe for electronic books that it include testing within the book. Apple's just released the iBook app for designing interactive applications that includes testing and pre-testing, video, audio, keynote presentations, all built into the same application. Why isn't that the model that you're following instead of basically taking the same textbook and producing a textbook that's electronic?
When I began this, I was trying to do what you're talking about. In fact, I would describe this as, from my perspective, this is a great opportunity to get students to break away from the traditional textbook relationship with information. And that's why it's to which the students can be directed with assignments. So it is true that this was submitted to the University of Florida Press partly because students want something that's familiar. But I don't see this as just an electronic version of the paper thing. And I found that out when I first began using the early versions of this. There's a major change in pedagogy if you're going to advantage of it. And so if you teach like a traditional textbook, it's just available, then you're not changing the way you're teaching it as much. I don't think that's correctly, but if you develop this as a resource, then it's changing the way you teach the course and going to have to change the way they relate to the information. And that to information is what causes some of those continued student concerns about this. It does require more interactivity, and that puts the burden on students. I think that's a benefit. But I'm also on the other side of the tenure line, and I don't worry about the spot scores as much because students do like familiarity. And you're asking to move more toward
and to answer your question, that was not available a year and a half ago when we started to actually develop this. And I'm going to be honest, I am not going in and making this into that and spending the time on it. I have 2 other books under contract. I have to do other things.
work with a designer, but I would suggest that you would work with a knowledgeable about education so that the process of how the interactivity, how the PowerPoint slides are presented, how the video is integrated, how the websites are integrated would be more thought out and maybe more complete to make it a completely new environment for education.
Would you please send us your contact information, because I'm eager to pursue this. I have much more time on my hands than Dr. Holman does.
One of the quick questions I would have, the PDF files, you got the individual text pieces, are they also interactive, or are you talking about the way that you described this, it's almost like the interactivity part, going out to different websites, things of this nature, that's all tied into the assignment?
There's links in the text.
They're actually, okay.
That's an interesting question, because when I began this, I just had links in the text. And then we were advised to remove them.
So it's all hyperlinked now, essentially.
So now what we do have are those think boxes that you often see off in the margins. You know, think about this and they'll have a link. Like, there's a great deal of criticism of the way we select nominees for president. Well, there's this Americans Elect organization. They have a website. And so there's a link to that. So that's where we have had a tremendous improvement in the quality of information that's available electronically. In these government websites and in these websites that are provided by large permanent organizations. So we don't have to worry about these things.
So it's not in text link, you actually have those out to the side.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we were advised to do, but you know, this isn't what I know very much about, and so when I hear someone say that they have a better way, I'm listening.
I would have actually preferred the other way that you're talking personally, but that's just me.
How do you deal with digital rights management in terms of piracy or anything like that?
So far we haven't cared. And you know, this goes back to something I said earlier. I think the American Political Science Association should have all of the best minds contribute a chapter and then just have this available. In the good old days, we used to jealously guard our tests, you know, put them in cabinets and lock them up. Well, I think that what we should do with our test banks is make them all freely available. If our students want to study 5,000 questions, more power to them. It doesn't bother me. So this doesn't, I just wish that our professional association played a leadership role in this, because economic example has a commitment to the development of field tests. And it has a public history presence that professional association doesn't have. And it's not everywhere. I mean, with some modifications.
Yeah, in Texas, you have to have a chapter on Texas.
But you asked an interesting question about property rights and incentives. It is true that it's extremely important to get the incentive balance right between faculty who create and the university that owns. But I've heard members of our board of trustees say, well, what do you mean? You're on our payroll and you're working and you're creating something that you think you own? There's an interest now in privatizing this world. I believe in California, the state owns syllabi. So this is a debate that's going on about the nature of universities and the nature of public information. It isn't limited to this setting.
We're in a knowledge worker economy instead of a service industry. I mean, the service industry would say that the institution you work for owns your intellectual property. A knowledge worker is emboldened to say, I own the property, and therefore I can choose to share it as I wish. I mean, that's a copyright issue that goes to music, to everything in the digital age. But you know, I would suggest just the opposite, that open source community for creating the best textbooks with the best minds out there. If you go to iTunes University, you can watch someone from Harvard University teach in a video podcast. Why isn't that something that we work to coalesce the best minds in the world to reinvent education and make it move forward instead of backward?
One other question as far as the upkeep in something like this. Do you have any suggestions on how you would actually follow through it? I can just see when you've got these live links in here, which I think is a great asset, okay? But we all know websites change continuously.
And that's another reason that we're passing this off to, and will maintain the links, make sure that everything is current and working and everything like that. Because that is another time-consuming task that's associated with this. You want to assign your students something that doesn't work. Because guess what? That link to stop working on it, or at least 75% of them will. Is the rare student that says, oh, the link's broken, maybe I should try to find this elsewhere. So you want it to work, and I have other things to do with my time other than doing that, yeah.
So how does that reoccurring outsourcing cost not trickle down to the cost of your book eventually and through inflation? Because, you know, when you're passing it on, that the job has outgrown what you have a few, but that maintenance.
Sure, and that's one of the, there's something like Orange Grove, which is a nonprofit university press-based option, as opposed, there are other e-text options out there. Most of them are from for-profit publishers, where they have an incentive to increase the price, maybe beyond inflation. The reality is that perhaps in 10 years the price will go up $5. You know, that's the world that we live in. That's not. When I was in college, that textbook costs $65 instead of $120. So we acknowledge that at some point it may increase in cost. We hope that by using Orange Grove it will increase exponentially in cost, and that we are set. No matter how much it increases in cost, it will still be cheaper than whatever they're charging for their textbooks, because the textbook industry costs just a much higher rate than inflation.
I address one comment related to what you asked about. We used to have people with a number of different degrees teaching this course for us. Law degrees, history degrees, political science degrees, public administration degrees, etc. Pay attention to what is being taught in this required course. That's a real problem. We had a required course, we paid no attention to what was being taught in it, and we had lots of people with different degrees teaching it. Now we have something that's the foundation, and when we hired a new faculty member, they don't have to spend time thinking about what they're going to do with this course, because format there. They can develop specialization, they can customize this around it. So if they don't like a chapter on public policy, they don't have to use a chapter on public policy, that's fine. But this is actually a time saver for a junior to teach Introduction to American Government. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. They don't have to reinvent all of this. And I think that's a real time saving for a junior faculty member in particular.
We also have been using this textbook in a blended learning American Government class, which is hybridized, half online, half in class. And we have a lot of assignments associated with reading the text and looking at an online source and then responding to those two things together, which are all part of the textbook.
If you're teaching psychology and you were to develop this, you'd save FAU students a ton of money. It's those long courses where this should really be done, where you have common material that's expected to be provided in a foundational course, especially in a curriculum that builds on earlier work. It's a logical thing, and I hope that the university would structure an incentive system to move us toward this, because the politics of higher education economics is changing.
Rice opted to have all of their 5 of their most common freshmen will have e-texts only that access through a flat fee, and the fee is really smaller than the price that they were paying for the 5 textbooks: Intro to Biology, Intro to Psychology, Math, English, and intro classes, where Rice has decided, as a university, we are going for e-texts for our and get out of the business to buy these very expensive internet.
So Rice is paying for you costs. So they're internalizing that cost, and that keeps the cost down for the students. So a university could internalize a lot of it.
I guess your publisher has versions of some of these books. Have you taken a peek at those?
Yes, and there's...
What would you say to developing it yourself?
Their e-text is that online, and at a $75 or $80 cost. Is some of that information online plus a very interactive element at a much lower cost. So while we have some of that information here in the traditional textbook format, here's how the founding happened. Here's federalism. We also have all of those interactive some stuff, but it's, I don't think, very well textbook. Yes?
One of the issues I can see with e-version textbooks is that sometimes you have to download a particular type of software to actually print. And here, and I don't know how it's going to be when you all make them, but at least in a PDF file, it's a lot easier.
It's a PDF file. And, you know, I have students who download these PDF files and print them out and have printed out. If that's what they're comfortable with, power to them. That's what they want to do. I have students that were taught to take notes in the text as they listen to lectures, and they want to do that. All right. I also who are using the text electronically in class. I have other students that probably have never looked at it. So, you know, the spectrum. Mm-hmm. And I can also, through Blackboard, check and see whether or not my students have looked at any of them. I mean, I don't like to Big Brother them, but I could if I wanted to. But if you wanted to make sure that a student knows how to access it, that very basic, you can say, all right, well, there are 5 students in my class that have never opened this up. Maybe they don't even understand how to do it. Maybe they're confused.
You were saying that your version or this textbook has some interactivity.
Mm-hmm.
Can you demonstrate?
Could you go to show them the congressional committee websites?
Yeah. We only have 5 minutes left. If anybody has questions while I'm doing this, we can. So this is a chapter on Congress. Congress is Congress in some ways, and that's the text. This is linked to it, hopefully will update as the Gallup poll updates, things like that. The Constitution and what it says about Congress is a static document, or fairly static over the last 200 years. So we don't have to have any kind of interactivity about this. But we also have in here access to the links of you can go to each congressional committee site from the text and access the committee sites and see what actually the committees are doing as opposed to just talking about what the committees do.
Or you could ask a student to enter their zip code, and then you'll find out who their member of Congress is, and then you can get information about the demographics of that district. That's much better than asking them to do it this way.
Yes? We don't, and I really wish that we did. That was something that, I mean, I use it in class. I use a lot of video and audio in class, and I wish, you know, like, to talk about civil, be able to. That's okay. I was like, somebody have a baby? What's going on? So I would love for there to be embedded in this, when we talk about civil rights, they can listen to Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech directly from the textbook. It's another one of those things that in dreamland, I want that to happen, but in reality land, I haven't yet made it happen.
You do have the students paying technology ways that they are able to feed so that they receive the text for each book free.
That's a very good question. And that's essentially what Rice, other universities are going in that direction.
Because we've been using the tech fees to get money.
I could see though in that model that if you approach a publisher and say, okay, we're going to buy hundreds of texts from you, definitely get a lot better price.
And Rice has used an online publisher. That is providing all of these texts, like one single publisher is providing all of the texts.